The storm came faster than anyone expected. Yuna stood at the window of observation post 6 and watched the sky turn from purple to black. The clouds moved like angry waves across the heavens. Lightning split the darkness every few seconds, and thunder shook the small cabin's walls. She had been on the planet Veloran 7 for 8 months now. She worked as a xenobiologist and field medic at the research station. Her job was to study the wildlife and help anyone who got hurt. It was good work. She liked it. But right now, she wished she was back at the main station with everyone else. The communication device on her desk made a crackling sound. Then Dr. Tiho's voice came through, broken and difficult to hear. Yuna, storm, 3 days, cannot send. Stay safe. Then there was only static. Yuna tried to respond, but the connection was dead. She put down the device and looked around the small cabin. It had one room with a bed, a desk, a small kitchen area, and a thermal unit that kept the place warm. There was enough food and water for a week. She would be fine. But she was alone, very alone. Outside, the wind screamed like a living thing. The trees of Veloran 7 were tall and strong, but even they bent under the force of the storm. Yuna could hear branches breaking somewhere in the forest. She pulled the window cover closed and stepped back. The cabin shook. Something hit the rear wall hard. Yuna heard a cracking sound and felt cold air rush in. She grabbed her flashlight and went to check. The back panel of the cabin had a crack in it now. Not big enough for her to fit through, but big enough to let in the cold. She would need to fix it, but not tonight. Tonight, the storm was too strong. She found some thermal blankets and stuffed them into the gap as best she could. It would have to do for now. Yuna was tired. She had spent the whole day collecting samples from the forest before the storm warning came. Then she had to run back to the cabin, secure everything, and try to contact the main station. Her body ached, and her eyes felt heavy. She knew she should stay awake and watch the storm, but exhaustion was stronger than worry. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and sat down near the thermal unit. The heat felt good against her back. She told herself she would just rest for a few minutes. Within seconds, she was asleep. The storm continued to rage outside. Hours passed. The wind howled and the rain fell in sheets so thick you could not see through them. Inside the cabin, Yuna slept deeply. She did not hear the scratching sound that came from the cracked panel at the back of the cabin. Something was outside, something small. The thermal blankets she had stuffed into the gap began to move. A small nose appeared, wet and dark. It sniffed the air. Then it pushed harder and the blankets fell away. A creature squeezed through the gap. It was about the size of a medium dog, covered in fur the color of silver smoke. Its eyes were large and copper-colored, reflecting the dim light from the thermal unit. It looked around the cabin with curiosity and fear. This was a Korath cub. The Korath were the apex predators of Veloran 7. Adults could grow as large as earth tigers, with powerful jaws and claws that could tear through metal. They were intelligent, social creatures that lived in family packs. The Galactic Union had strict rules about them. No one was allowed to approach them, touch them, or interfere with them in any way. But this was just a cub, a baby really, and it was cold and scared. The cub stood near the crack in the wall, shaking from the cold. Water dripped from its fur. It looked at the sleeping human on the floor, then at the thermal unit behind her. Heat. It could feel the heat from across the room. Slowly, carefully, the cub moved toward the warmth. Behind it, another nose appeared at the crack. Then another. 2 more cubs squeezed through the gap and into the cabin. They were from the same litter, siblings separated from their pack during the storm. They had been wandering in the rain for hours, looking for shelter. Now they had found it. The 3 cubs gathered near the thermal unit. They were still scared of the strange creature sleeping on the floor. She smelled different from anything they had ever encountered. Not like prey, not like a threat, just different. The smallest cub moved first. It was colder than its siblings and could not wait any longer. It crept forward and touched Yuna's leg with its nose. She did not wake. The cub pressed closer, feeling the warmth of her body through the blanket. Humans ran hotter than most species in the galaxy. To the cub, she felt like a second sun. The cub climbed onto her legs and curled up. It was warm, so warm. The cub let out a small sound of relief. The other two cubs watched. They waited. The sleeping creature did not attack. She did not even move. After a moment, the second cub came forward and pressed against Yuna's side. Then the third, the largest of the three, climbed onto her stomach and chest, settling its weight across her body. Yuna stirred in her sleep. Her arm moved without her thinking about it, draping over the smallest cub and pulling it closer. The cubs froze for a moment, but the touch was gentle. There was no danger in it. One by one, the cubs began to relax, and then together they began to purr. The sound was deep and rumbling, like a small engine running inside each of their chests. It filled the cabin with a low vibration that seemed to sink into everything it touched. For pack animals like the Korath, this sound meant safety. It meant family. It meant home. For Yuna, asleep and dreaming, it meant something else. The sound reached into her sleeping mind and told her that everything was okay. She was safe. She was warm. She was not alone. She slept deeper than she had in months. Outside, the storm continued. But inside the small cabin, 3 predator cubs had found something they did not expect. They had found warmth. They had found comfort. And without knowing it, they had found the one species in the entire galaxy that would not be afraid of them. Hours passed. The rain fell. The wind blew. And in the dim light of the thermal unit, the human and the predators slept together, their bodies tangled in a pile of fur and warmth. Neither the cubs nor Yuna knew what was coming. Neither of them knew that when morning came, she would wake up unable to move, trapped under 90 kilograms of alien predator. And neither of them knew that outside, somewhere in the storm, something much larger was searching for those 3 missing cubs. The mother was coming. Yuna woke up slowly. The first thing she noticed was the warmth. It was everywhere, pressing against her from all sides. The second thing she noticed was the weight. Something heavy was on top of her, several somethings. And they were moving. Her eyes opened. The cabin was filled with soft morning light coming through the cracks in the window cover. The storm had passed, or at least calmed down. She could no longer hear the wind screaming outside. But she could hear something else, a deep, rumbling sound, like a machine running. It took her a moment to realize what it was. Purring. Yuna looked down at her body and felt her heart stop. 3 Korath cubs were piled on top of her. One was curled against her side, its silver fur pressed against her ribs. Another was draped across her legs, its weight pinning her knees to the floor. The third, the largest one, was lying directly on her chest, its face just centimeters from hers. The largest cub opened its copper eyes and looked at her. Yuna stopped breathing. She knew what these creatures were. Every researcher on Veloran 7 knew about the Korath. They were apex predators. They could kill most species in the galaxy with a single bite. Even the cubs had teeth and claws sharp enough to cause serious damage. And 3 of them were sleeping on her body. Her training kicked in before her fear could take over. Rule 1 when dealing with predators: do not panic. Panic releases chemicals into the air. Chemicals that smell like prey. Chemicals that trigger hunting instincts. Yuna forced herself to breathe slowly. In, out, in, out. The largest cub tilted its head, watching her. Its copper eyes were curious, not aggressive. It did not see her as food. It did not see her as a threat. It saw her as something warm. The cub lowered its head and licked her chin. Yuna almost laughed. The tongue was rough like sandpaper, but the gesture was gentle. It was the kind of thing a puppy might do, or a kitten. She realized something then. These cubs were bobbies. They were just bobbies who had gotten lost in the storm and found somewhere warm to sleep. They were not hunting. They were not attacking. They were cuddling. But she still could not move. She tried to shift her legs. The cub lying on them was heavier than it looked. She pushed gently, and the cub made a small sound of complaint. It pressed down harder, refusing to move. She tried to lift her arms. Her right arm was free, but her left arm was trapped under the smallest cub. She could feel the blood flow slowing. Her fingers were starting to tingle. The largest cub on her chest adjusted its position, spreading its weight more evenly. Now Yuna could barely breathe. Not because the cub was trying to hurt her, but simply because it was so heavy. She guessed each cub weighed about 30 kilograms. Together, that was 90 kilograms of predator on top of a 60-kilogram human. She was completely trapped. Yuna lay still and thought about her options. Option 1, scream and fight, try to throw the cubs off and run, but that would trigger their predator instincts. They would chase her, they would catch her. Even cubs could be dangerous when frightened. Option 2, wait, stay calm. Eventually the cubs would wake up fully and leave on their own. But how long would that take? And what about their mother? Koreth traveled in family packs. If these cubs were here, where was the adult? Option 3, make contact. Use what she knew about pack animals to communicate that she was not a threat. Build trust. Get them to move on their own. Yuna decided on option 3. She started with her voice, low and soft, barely above a whisper. "Hey there," she said. "Good morning." The cubs' ears moved. They were listening. "You're very warm," Yuna continued. "I bet you were cold last night. The storm was bad, wasn't it?" The smallest cub lifted its head. It looked at her with those big copper eyes. Yuna smiled at it. "You're safe now," she said. "The storm is over, but I really need you to move a little bit. My legs are falling asleep." The cub tilted its head as if trying to understand her words. Of course it could not understand human language, but it could understand tone, and Yuna's tone was gentle, calm, and friendly. The smallest cub stood up on shaky legs. It stretched, yawning widely enough to show all its teeth. Then it stepped off Yuna's arm and sat down beside her instead. "One down, 2 to go." Yuna turned her attention to the cub on her legs. This one seemed more stubborn. It had buried its face against her knee and showed no interest in moving. "Come on," Yuna said softly. "You can lie next to me instead. I'll still be warm, I promise." She reached out with her free hand and touched the cub's head. It flinched at first, then relaxed as she began to scratch behind its ears. The purring sound got louder. The cub's tail twitched happily. Slowly, carefully, Yuna guided the cub off her legs. It moved reluctantly but did not fight her. When it was finally off, it immediately pressed against her side again, seeking contact. Now only the largest cub remained, and it showed no intention of moving. This cub was clearly the leader of the 3. It was bigger, more confident, and had claimed the best spot on Yuna's chest. Moving it would be harder. Yuna looked into its copper eyes. "You're the boss, aren't you?" The cub blinked at her. "I respect that," Yuna said, "but I really can't breathe properly with you sitting there. How about a deal? You move and I'll scratch that spot behind your ears. The others seem to like it." She raised her hand slowly, giving the cub time to see what she was doing. She had learned this trick from working with animals back on Earth. Never surprise a predator. Always let them see your movements. Her fingers touched the fur behind the cub's left ear. She began to scratch gently. The effect was immediate. The cub's eyes half closed. Its purring became so loud it vibrated through Yuna's chest. Its whole body relaxed. "That's it," Yuna whispered. "Good baby, now let's just shift you over a little." She used her other hand to guide the cub sideways. It moved without resistance, too lost in the pleasure of the scratching to care about its position. Within seconds, it had slid off her chest and onto the floor beside her. Yuna could finally breathe. She lay there for a moment, catching her breath. All three cubs were now lying around her instead of on top of her. They formed a furry circle with her at the center. They were still touching her, still seeking her warmth, but she was no longer trapped. She had done it. Una slowly sat up. Her whole body ached from sleeping on the hard floor with so much weight on top of her. Her left arm was still tingling as blood flow returned, but she was alive and unhurt. The cubs watched her with curious eyes. They did not seem afraid of her anymore. If anything, they seemed comfortable. They had accepted her. Una allowed herself a small smile. This was probably the strangest morning of her life. She had just spent the night as a pillow for 3 apex predators, and somehow she had survived. Then she heard the sound. It came from outside, a low growl, deep and powerful, the kind of sound that large animals make when they are warning others to stay away, the kind of sound that predators make when they are ready to kill. The cubs heard it too. Their ears went flat against their heads. They made small, frightened sounds and pressed closer to Una. She looked toward the cracked panel at the back of the cabin. The morning light showed a shadow outside, a very large shadow. The mother had found them, and she was coming in. The wall exploded. Una threw her arms over her face as pieces of metal and wood flew across the cabin. The cracked panel that had let the cubs in was now a gaping hole, and standing in that hole was the largest predator she had ever seen. The matriarch was massive. She stood taller than Una at the shoulder, with muscles that moved like liquid under her silver fur. Her eyes were the same copper color as her cubs, but there was no curiosity in them. Only cold calculation. Only the focus of a mother protecting her children. She growled again, and the sound made Una's bones shake. The cubs cried out. They ran toward their mother, jumping and climbing over the broken wall to reach her. The matriarch lowered her head and sniffed each one carefully, checking for injuries. When she found none, her attention turned back to Una. Una had not moved. She was still sitting on the floor where she had woken up, her arms now slowly lowering from her face. She knew that running would be pointless. The matriarch could cross the cabin in a single leap. She could kill Una before Una even reached the door. The only chance was to stay still and hope. The matriarch stepped into the cabin. Each footstep made the floor shake. She was so large that she barely fit through the hole she had made. Her tail swished behind her, knocking over a chair. Una's heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had dealt with predators before, not like this one, but enough to know the rules. Rule 1: do not run. Running triggers the chase instinct. Rule 2: do not stare. Direct eye contact is a challenge. Rule 3: make yourself small. Show that you are not a threat. Una lowered her gaze. She hunched her shoulders, making her body as small as possible. And then she did something she had only read about in xenobiology textbooks. She tilted her head back and exposed her throat. In the language of pack predators, this gesture was universal. It meant submission. It meant surrender. It meant, I am not your enemy. Please do not kill me. The matriarch stopped. She was close enough now that Una could feel the heat of her breath. The smell of wet fur and forest filled the cabin. The matriarch's nose was centimeters from Una's exposed throat. One bite, that was all it would take. One bite and Una would be dead. But the bite did not come. Instead, the matriarch sniffed. She smelled Una's throat, her hair, her hands. She smelled the blanket that Una had been wrapped in. She smelled the spot on the floor where the cubs had been sleeping. Una stayed perfectly still. She barely breathed. Her whole body trembled with fear, but she did not move. The cubs had come back into the cabin. They watched from near the broken wall, their copper eyes wide. The smallest cub made a small sound and took a step toward Una. The matriarch's head snapped toward it. She made a low sound in her throat, a warning. The cub stopped. But then the cub did something unexpected. It walked past its mother and pressed itself against Una's side. It looked up at the matriarch and made the same sound again. A different sound this time, a pleading sound. Yuna suddenly understood. The cub was telling its mother something. It was saying she kept us warm, she kept us safe, she is not dangerous. The other two cubs followed their sibling. They gathered around Yuna, pressing against her body just as they had done during the night. They purred, loud and strong, filling the cabin with their rumbling voices. The matriarch watched. Her copper eyes moved from her cubs to the human they surrounded. She was thinking, calculating, deciding. Yuna knew that this moment would determine whether she lived or died. Most species in the galaxy would have been screaming by now. Most species released fear chemicals when they were scared, flooding the air with smells that marked them as prey. But humans were different. Humans had evolved alongside predators on their home planet. They had learned to control their fear, to hide it, to push it down and keep it locked inside. Yuna was terrified, but she did not smell like terror. The matriarch sniffed the air one more time. She smelled human. She smelled her cubs. She smelled the strange mix of both, tangled together from a night of shared warmth. But she did not smell fear. She did not smell prey. She smelled pack. Slowly, the matriarch lowered her massive body to the floor. She lay down beside Yuna, her great head coming to rest near the human's knee. The cubs chirped with happiness and climbed over their mother, settling into the warm spaces between her legs and body. Yuna did not know what to do. She was frozen in place, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The matriarch was so close. She could reach out and touch that silver fur if she wanted to. The smallest cub crawled from the matriarch's side and climbed back into Yuna's lap. It curled up there, purring loudly, and closed its eyes. The matriarch watched this. She did not growl, she did not attack, she simply watched with those ancient copper eyes. Then she did something that Yuna would never forget. The matriarch pressed her great head against Yuna's shoulder. It was gentle, almost tender. The massive predator leaned into the small human and let out a long, slow breath. It was acceptance. Yuna felt tears spring to her eyes. She did not know why she was crying. Fear, relief, wonder, all of it mixed together into something she could not name. Her hand moved on its own, reaching out to touch the matriarch's head. The fur was softer than she expected, warm and thick, like the finest blanket. She stroked it gently just once and the matriarch's eyes closed. They stayed like that for a long time. The human and the predators, sitting together in the ruined cabin while the morning sun streamed through the broken wall. The cubs slept. The matriarch rested. And Yuna slowly let herself believe that she was going to survive. An hour passed, then two. The sun rose higher and the last clouds from the storm drifted away. The forest outside was full of sounds, birds calling, water dripping, small creatures moving through the undergrowth. Then a new sound cut through the morning air, a mechanical sound, the hum of engines. The rescue shuttle was coming. The matriarch's eyes snapped open. She lifted her head and looked toward the sky, her ears turning to track the sound. A growl built in her throat. Yuna put her hand on the matriarch's side. "It's okay," she said softly. "They're friends, they won't hurt you." She did not know if the matriarch understood her words, but she hoped that the tone was enough. Calm, reassuring, safe. The matriarch looked at her. Those copper eyes held intelligence that Yuna was only beginning to understand. The predator was making a decision. Fight the new threat, or trust the human who had kept her cubs warm through the night. The shuttle grew louder. It was close now, probably landing in the clearing near the cabin. Yuna kept her hand on the matriarch's side. "Please," she whispered, "trust me." The matriarch held her gaze for a long moment. Then she rose to her feet, shaking the cubs awake. She made a series of low sounds, gathering her children. The cubs complained but obeyed, climbing off Yuna and moving to their mother's side. But the smallest cub hesitated. It looked back at Yuna with those big copper eyes. It did not want to leave. "Go on," Yuna said gently. "Go with your mother, I'll be okay." The cub made a small, sad sound. Then it turned and followed its siblings out through the broken wall. The matriarch was the last to leave. She paused at the edge of the forest, looking back at the humans still sitting on the cabin floor. Their eyes met one final time. And then the predators were gone, vanishing into the trees like silver smoke. Yuna sat alone in the ruined cabin, listening to the shuttle engines power down. Voices called out, human voices searching for her. She did not answer right away. She was still thinking about those copper eyes. She was still feeling the warmth of the cubs against her body. She was still amazed that she was alive. "Yuna," a voice shouted. "Yuna, are you in there?" She finally found her voice. "I'm here," she called back. "I'm okay." But even as she said the words, she knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. Something had changed in that cabin during the storm. Something important. She had been accepted by predators, and somehow, against all odds, she had survived. Junho was the first one through the door. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that had seen many difficult situations. He led the rescue team at the Veloran 7 station, and he was known for staying calm in emergencies. But when he stepped into the cabin and saw Yuna sitting on the floor, surrounded by silver fur and the smell of predator, even he stopped in his tracks. "What happened here?" he asked slowly. Yuna looked up at him. She was tired, her hair was tangled, and there were scratch marks on her blanket from small claws, but she was smiling. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said. Behind Junho came Dr. Somi, the station's veterinarian and Korath specialist. She had spent 3 years studying the predators from a safe distance, using cameras and drones to observe their behavior. She had never been within 100 meters of one. Now she was standing in a cabin that smelled like a Korath den. "Is that?" Somi walked to the broken wall and touched the edge of the hole. "A Korath did this, a large one, very large." She turned to Yuna with wide eyes. "How are you alive?" "I'm still figuring that out myself," Yuna admitted. The third person to enter was Commander Veth. He was not human. He belonged to the Torani species, a tall and thin people with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. His species had evolved on a peaceful planet with no large predators. The very idea of apex hunters terrified them on a genetic level. Commander Veth took one step into the cabin, smelled the air, and immediately backed out again. "This is not safe," he said from outside. "We should leave now." "The Korath are gone," Yuna said. "They left when they heard the shuttle." "Gone does not mean safe," Veth argued. "They could return. They will return. We need to extract you immediately." Junho knelt beside Yuna and checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Can you walk?" "I'm fine, just stiff from sleeping on the floor." Yuna paused, "with company." Somi was recording everything with her tablet. "Tell me exactly what happened, every detail." Yuna told them the story, the storm, the cracked wall, the cubs who squeezed through looking for warmth, the way they had piled on top of her while she slept, her careful efforts to move them when she woke up, and finally the arrival of the matriarch. When she described how the matriarch had pressed her head against her shoulder, Somi nearly dropped her tablet. "That's impossible," the veterinarian said. "Korath have never allowed any species close enough for contact. We've documented cases of them killing Torani researchers from 50 meters away just for being in their territory." Commander Veth made a distressed sound from outside. "This proves my point. They are dangerous. The human was lucky, nothing more." "It wasn't luck," Yuna said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "When I woke up and found the cubs on me, I could have panicked. I could have screamed and tried to run. Any other species would have, right? Because that's the normal response to finding predators on your body." Somi nodded slowly. "The fear response. It's hardwired into most intelligent species. When we encounter predators, our bodies release chemicals that signal danger. The predators smell these chemicals and identify us as prey. Exactly, Yuna said. But humans don't work that way. We can feel fear without letting it control us. We can be terrified on the inside while staying calm on the outside. I was scared. I was really, really scared. But I didn't show it. I didn't smell like it. Junho sat back on his heels, understanding dawning on his face. Because we're persistent predators. Yuna nodded. Humans evolved alongside wolves, lions, and bears. We didn't just run from them. We watched them. We learned from them. Eventually, we even lived with them. We're the species that looked at wolves and thought, I bet we could be friends. That's insane, Veth said from outside. That's humanity, Junho replied. Somi was typing rapidly on her tablet. This is unprecedented. If what you're saying is true, humans have a natural ability to interact with apex predator species that no other intelligent race possesses. The implications for xenobiology, for first contact protocols, for everything. She bonded with them, Junho said simply. In one night, she did what no Taurani or any other species could do in 100 years of careful observation. Commander Veth finally stepped back into the cabin, though he stayed close to the door. His forearms were crossed tightly against his chest, a Taurani gesture of extreme discomfort. I do not understand this, he admitted. My people have spent our entire evolutionary history avoiding creatures like the Korath. The very sight of them triggers panic responses we cannot control. We literally cannot be calm around predators. Our bodies will not allow it. Neither can most species, Somi said. That's why humans are so unusual. They're one of the few intelligent races that evolved as predators themselves. They don't have the same hardwired fear responses. Yuna stood up slowly, her legs still stiff. It's not that we don't feel fear. We do. But we learn to work with it instead of being controlled by it. Fear is just information. It tells you there's danger. But what you do with that information is a choice. She walked to the broken wall and looked out at the forest. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light through the tall trees. Somewhere out there, the matriarch was leading her cubs back to their den. She accepted me, Yuna said softly. The matriarch. She could have killed me in a heartbeat, but she didn't. She smelled her cubs on me and she understood that I had kept them safe. In her mind, I became part of the pack. Temporarily, Veth said nervously. Yuna shook her head. I don't think so. Pack bonds are strong with these animals. Somi, you've studied their behavior. Once a Korath accepts someone into their group, do they ever reject them? Somi checked her notes. Not that we've observed. Korath packs are extremely loyal. Once you're in for life, she paused. But no non-Korath has ever been in, until now. The group was silent for a moment. Then Junho spoke. What does this mean for the research station for our mission here? Somi's eyes were bright with excitement. It could mean everything. The Korath are one of the most intelligent predator species in this sector. We've been trying to study them for decades but could never get close. If Yuna has formed a bond with this pack, she might be able to bridge the gap. She could become our first true contact with them. That's a very big if, Veth said, and a very big risk. It's my risk to take, Yuna said. She turned from the window to face the others. I want to do this. I want to see if the bond is real, if I can learn more about them. This could be the most important xenobiological discovery of our time. Junho studied her face. He had known Yuna for 8 months, worked alongside her in the field. He knew she was smart, careful, and capable. But this was different. This was dangerous in a way that nothing else had been. Are you sure? He asked. Yuna thought about the smallest cub, the one who had climbed into her lap even after its mother arrived. She thought about the matriarch pressing her great head against her shoulder. She thought about those copper eyes and the intelligence behind them. I'm sure, she said. Junho nodded slowly. Then we'll support you, but we do this carefully, we do this smart, no unnecessary risks." "Agreed," Yuna said. They spent another hour at the cabin, documenting everything. Somi took samples of the fur left behind, measured the claw marks on the broken wall, and recorded detailed notes about everything Yuna could remember. When they finally left, Yuna took one last look at the ruined observation post. It seemed smaller now, less important, just a broken box in the forest where something amazing had happened. As the shuttle lifted off, Yuna looked down at the trees. She could not see the Korath from the air. They were too good at hiding, but she knew they were down there somewhere. And somehow, she knew she would see them again. 3 days later, she returned to her regular quarters at the main station. That evening, when she stepped outside for some fresh air, she found something sitting on the ground in front of her door. It was a dead animal, a small forest creature freshly killed, carefully placed. An offering, a gift. The Korath had not forgotten her. 3 months had passed since the storm. Yuna stood at the edge of the forest as the sun began to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the air was cool with the promise of evening. She carried no weapons. She wore no protective gear. She was alone. But she was not afraid. The research station had changed since that night in the cabin. Word of her encounter with the Korath had spread through the scientific community like fire. Researchers from across the galaxy sent messages, asking for details, asking for proof, asking how a human had done what no other species could do. Dr. Tiho had put Yuna in charge of a new project, the first sanctioned observation study of Korath's social behavior at close range. It was dangerous work. It was important work, and Yuna loved every moment of it. She had returned to the forest many times over the past 3 months. At first, she went with others. Junho would wait at a safe distance while she walked forward alone. Somi would monitor everything from the shuttle, recording data that would fill hundreds of research papers. But the Korath only appeared when Yuna was alone. They were smart. They understood that she was different from the others. The other humans kept their distance, stayed near their machines, smelled of metal and fear. But Yuna came to them openly. She sat in the forest and waited. She brought no technology. She made no demands. And slowly, carefully, they began to trust her. The first time the matriarch appeared after those initial 3 days, Yuna's heart nearly stopped. The massive predator emerged from the shadows between the trees like a silver ghost. She stood 20 meters away and watched with those copper eyes. Yuna sat down on the forest floor. She did not approach. She did not call out. She just waited. The matriarch watched her for an hour. Then she turned and disappeared back into the forest. The second time she came closer, 15 meters, then 10. Each visit the distance between them shrank. Each visit the trust grew. After 1 month, the matriarch finally approached close enough to touch. She pressed her nose against Yuna's hand and sniffed deeply. Then she made a sound, low and rumbling, that Yuna had come to recognize. It was a greeting, a welcome. After 2 months, the cubs started coming too. They had grown so much. The smallest cub, the one who had climbed into her lap that stormy night, was now the size of a large dog, but it still acted like a baby when it saw Yuna. It would run to her, chirping with excitement, and try to climb onto her lap even though it no longer fit. The other cubs were more reserved, but they accepted her presence without fear. They played around her, chasing each other through the undergrowth, occasionally bumping against her legs as they passed. Now, 3 months later, Yuna had become part of something she never expected. She had become part of the pack. Tonight she was waiting for them again. The gifts at her door had continued every few days, always fresh kills, always carefully placed. It was how the Korath showed affection to their own. They were feeding her, caring for her, treating her as family. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon. The first stars appeared in the purple sky. Somewhere in the trees, An animal called out with a long, lonely cry. Then she heard them. The sound of large bodies moving through the undergrowth, the soft pad of heavy feet, the familiar rumble of purring voices. The matriarch emerged first, as always. She had more scars than she'd had 3 months ago. Life in the wild was hard, even for apex predators. But her copper eyes were bright and alert, and she moved with the powerful grace of a creature in her prime. Behind her came the cubs, all 3 of them, now nearly half their mother's size. They saw Yuna and bounded forward, chirping greetings. The smallest cub reached her first. It pressed its head against her chest, purring so loudly she could feel it in her bones. She wrapped her arms around it and scratched behind its ears, just like she had that first morning. "I missed you too," she whispered. The other cubs circled around her, nudging her with their noses, rubbing their sides against her body. They were marking her with their scent, claiming her as theirs. Pack behavior, family behavior. The matriarch approached more slowly. She touched her nose to Yuna's forehead in greeting, then lay down nearby, watching over her children and her strange human friend. For a long time they stayed like that. The cubs played and rested and played again. The matriarch groomed herself and watched the forest for threats. Yuna sat among them, part of their circle, accepted and protected. She heard footsteps behind her, human footsteps. She turned to see Junho approaching from the direction of the station. He stopped about 50 meters away, respecting the boundary she had established. "They're getting bigger," he called out softly. Yuna smiled. "They're growing fast. Another few months and they'll be almost as big as their mother." Junho shook his head in amazement. "You know, when I found you that morning, buried under all that fur, I thought you were dead. I really did." "I was terrified," Yuna admitted. "You didn't look it. That's the secret." Yuna looked at the matriarch, who was watching Junho with careful eyes. "Fear is just information. What you do with it, that's the choice." Junho took a few steps closer, testing the limits. The matriarch's ears flattened slightly, a warning. He stopped. "The other researchers are asking again," he said. "They want to know if they can start making contact too. Somi thinks she's ready." Yuna considered this. Over the past 3 months, other humans at the station had started to show interest in approaching the Korath. They had watched Yuna's progress and wanted to try themselves. She had been training them, teaching them the rules she had learned through careful observation. "Stay calm, move slowly, never surprise them, always let them come to you." "Somi can try," Yuna said finally. "Start with the beta pack near the southern ridge. They're smaller and less territorial than this group. Have her go alone at first. No equipment, no protection. She needs to show them she's not a threat." Junho nodded. "I'll tell her." He paused. "Yuna, do you realize what you've done? You've opened up an entirely new field of study. First contact with apex predators. Nobody thought it was possible." "It wasn't me," Yuna said. "It was them. They made the choice to accept me. I just gave them the chance." The smallest cub had fallen asleep against her side, its breathing slow and steady. Its siblings were curled up nearby, exhausted from playing. Even the matriarch's eyes were half closed now. Junho smiled at the scene. "I'll leave you to it. Don't stay out too late." "I won't." He turned and walked back toward the station. The matriarch watched him go, relaxing only when he disappeared from view. Yuna settled back against the warm bulk of the sleeping cubs. The stars were fully out now, filling the sky with points of light. 2 moons hung above the horizon, casting silver shadows across the forest floor. She thought about everything that had happened since that stormy night. She thought about fear and trust, and the strange bonds that could form between different kinds of creatures. She thought about humanity and its long history with predators, wolves becoming dogs, wildcats becoming companions, the endless desire to connect with dangerous things. The galaxy was full of species that had evolved to fear predators. They hid from them, ran from them, developed technologies to destroy them from a distance. The very idea of approaching an apex hunter was madness to them. But humans had walked a different path. They had looked at wolves and lions and bears and thought, I wonder if we could be friends. They had reached out their hands to creatures that could kill them and offered trust instead of fear. It was perhaps the most terrifying thing about humanity. And sometimes, like tonight, it was the most beautiful thing too. The smallest cub stirred in its sleep, pressing closer to Yuna's warmth. She put her hand on its head and felt the vibration of its purring against her palm. Sleep well, she whispered to the predators around her. I'll keep watch for a while. The matriarch opened one copper eye, looked at Yuna, and then closed it again. Trust, complete and absolute. Yuna sat in the darkness surrounded by apex predators, and she had never felt safer in her life. This was what it meant to be human. Not the technology, not the intelligence, not the ability to travel between stars. It was this, the willingness to reach out, the courage to trust, the strange and wonderful ability to find family in the most unlikely places. Somewhere in the forest, another pack of Korath called out to the moons. The matriarch raised her head and answered, her voice deep and powerful. Yuna smiled in the darkness. The pack was growing, and she was part of it now. Forever,